What's going on, guys? This is Damien from The Lookout and welcome to our Learn to Play Starter Frieza video, the ultimate guide for learning Starter Frieza in Fusion World. But before we begin this video, huge shout out to the Coffee Club, our lovely patrons. These are our $2 and up patrons that buy us coffee. They keep this crazy content machine going, and guys, thanks a lot for your support. If you wish to join the Coffee Club, link to our Patreon is in the description below. And I think that's about everything. Roll the video! As with all of our videos, let's start with the breakdown. So I'm gonna give you a brief archetype rundown. I'll show you some lines of play, various interactions. We will go very in depth on how these cards work, what counters them, matchups and all. Then I'll show you my deck list. We'll go over the first 3 turns with the deck, and then we'll just wrap it up with a summary. Let's go! Let's start with the leader. On the front side is Frieza, yellow 15k, when attack draw 1. This is super standard, this is very basic, and you awaken at 4 lives or less, you draw 1 card and then you flip him over. The awakened side, however, is phenomenal. On the awakened side, Frieza is absolutely nuts, so you still draw on attack, that's awesome, but you also get this exceptionally strong ability. At the end of the turn, choose up to 2 of your battle cards and switch them to active mode. Up to 2, that means that you can use this if you have only 1. Or you can choose to switch 0 for some reason. Anyway, this ability is insane because it allows you to attack with your blockers and then switch them to active mode at the end of your turn so that they can block, because a card needs to be in active mode to block. It messes around with the rules of the game. It basically breaks the rules of the game a bit, and that's what makes it exceptionally powerful. Anything that breaks the rules of any game is super strong. So yeah, you get to swing with your blockers and then you get to restand them and hide behind them. That's a very interesting thing. That's very Frieza, I would say. Let's start with checking out some of these blockers, some of our restand targets. We have a couple of potential targets in yellow, but I chose to go with these 5. I think these 5 are exceptionally good in the deck. So we have the Cooler SR, we have Kui, I think that's how you pronounce it. We have King Cold, the king himself, Zarbon as a 2-drop, and then Ginyu. I love Ginyu, I think this Ginyu card is phenomenal. So though we can play any yellow battle card, these give you the most value. Let's dive a bit deeper into targets. So when identifying targets for this effect, we break them down into 3 categories. Recurring value, that's Ginyu and Cooler. Instant value, that's Zarbon. That's usually you play it, you get your value from it instantly. It's a non-play effect and then that's it. Like, effect fires off, done. And we have late value. These are the ones where you get something when they are KO'd, or you get it after your turn. So recurring value allows you to get value each turn, or in case of Cooler you get each turn, in case of Ginyu you get each of your turns, you get some value from it. Late value is usually on your opponent's turn when they KO a card. So besides these 3 categories, our targets should also have at least 20k power to avoid being removed by red cards. Red doesn't have a lot of cards that can get rid of a 20k card. It's usually 15 or less. So try to always look for 20k cards just so that you can get a leg up in the red matchup. Let's dive deeper into these targets, starting with the recurring value ones. Ginyu. Ginyu is amazing. Ginyu is one of my favorite cards in yellow. Basically, activate main, you switch into rest mode, you draw 1 card. Now you might be thinking, well, you know, Damien, this is kinda ass, you know, it's... Why would I do this instead of just playing a 1-drop on play draw a card? Because A, you can use this every single turn. You can use this every turn. B, you can restand him with Frieza, so it's impossible to attack into him. And most importantly, it forces a removal. It's gonna force your opponent to either swing into this card or spend a removal to get rid of it if it's in active mode. Because as long as Ginyu is on field, you will get to draw 1. Like every turn you will be drawing, unless your opponent gets rid of Ginyu. which is more value than, for example, Sorbet, which just says on play draw 1. Cooler, well, Cooler has this cool ability: when he attacks or when he blocks, choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards and switch it to rest mode, then if it costs 2 or less, KO it. The KO part is less important. His main value comes from resting potential attackers on your opponent's turn. So when you swing with him, you can rest a blocker, for example, and then just go 30k face. And on your opponent's turn, because he's 30k, he's so hard to remove. For some colors, he's very hard to remove. Your opponent will be swinging into it, and then you can just block and rest another potential attacker. Your opponent will have to weirdly sequence their next play to dance around the Cooler's effect. Like, they have to play a card, attack, play a card, attack. They can't have multiple cards on the field because they don't want to allow Cooler to have something to switch to rest mode. That's basically the recurring value target. Now let's talk about the instant value card. There's only one, and that's Zarbon, and you play 4 copies of Zarbon. Like, that's basically it. This one is extremely straightforward. Our leader is basically useless on the front side. He doesn't do anything, and a smart opponent will not attack us. They'll just force us to remain on the unawakened side as long as possible. So we need to play Zarbon, we need to play a Self-Awakener. We need to find a way to take our own lives. Plus he's 20k blocker. Like, worst case, you play him. If you're looking to awaken, 90% of the time you just play him, you grab a life, and then you swing 20k with him. So, yeah, once you get to awaken, he's 20k blocker. He loses the instant value because you've already awakened, but he helps you get to that point, which is the main value of the card. Finally, let's talk about the late value targets. First off, a very important thing about these two: they're too big to be removed without KOing them outside of a specific matchup. And when I say specific matchup, I mean blue. Like, Kui is worse against blue, especially Trunks, because Trunks can just bounce him back to hand. King Cold is slightly better, but usually Kui is the one that's struggling in the blue matchup. What does Kui do? When you KO him, you draw 1, and King Cold, when you KO him, you choose up to one of your opponent's rest mode battle cards, cost 4 or less, and you KO it. Both of them are attackers, which can restand once you have your leader awakened. But yeah, basically, they're too big to be removed without being KO'd outside of blue, outside of specific matchups, so you will always get the when KO'd effect. Unless you're playing against like Beerus in red, you will always get the when KO'd effect, which is amazing. In this part of the video, we will talk about my favorite thing in the game, Tresholds. Yeah, I don't believe that enough people are informing you about Tresholds. These are super important to understand the game. Like every color, yellow is bound to certain design thresholds. In yellow, the threshold is usually an energy cost of 3 or less. That's it. For example, if you look at Emperor's Deathbeam, activate main, choose up to one of your opponent's rest mode battle cards with a cost of 3 or less and KO it. It's usually 3 or less for an effect. Sometimes, very rarely, like in the case of King Cold, it is 4 or less. But 90% of the time, your effects are only going to hit cards that cost 3 or less, like 2 or less, which is even worse. So you can't really fight bigger cards. You don't have removals or effects which target bigger cards, and by bigger cards I mean like 5+, which means that you're kinda gonna have a hard time against green. This creates an issue for the deck, because the longer the game goes, the more difficult it will be to deal with your opponent's cards. The more energy your opponent has, the more opportunities to play 5+ costs, the more of an uphill battle this becomes. Because at some point, a lot of your cards will just have dead effects. And then you just have to punch through. Sometimes you just have to punch through. But you will be getting some early game value. However, it's not all bad. We have 2 cards only 2 cards without the Threshold. So it's Frieza, 1 drop, one of the best cards in the game, I think, and Crusher Ball. Both of these cards allow you to switch a card to rest mode, ignoring the cost. So you can actually hit 5+ cost with this. For example, as you can see here, you can play the Crusher Ball, activate main, draw 1 card, then choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards and switch it to rest mode. You target the 6 cost Gohan, you switch it to rest mode, and then let's say you follow up with the Frieza 5 drop, which locks it in rest mode for the duration of next turn. So when combined with the boss monster, you can basically lock any card in the game. You can just stun any threat in the game, but you only have 2 cards that can actually do this, the Frieza and the Crusher Ball. So yeah, if you're playing against green, for example, I would look to keep these cards as long as possible, because otherwise we just kind of have to rely on our early game value, and once that's done, it's just punching through. In this part of the video, we will be talking about matchups. We don't usually do this, but I believe that it's important for Frieza. So, not specifically their matchups, more specific colors matchups. So let's start with red, because there's a lot of discussion that red is very toxic towards Frieza deck. I don't necessarily agree. I believe that Frieza plays decently into red unless you run into Beerus. If you run into Beerus, you're kinda screwed. If you run into U7, it's much more manageable. So I took out these 6 cards, and they're the only cards that can single-handedly get rid of your blockers. Single-handedly means that you don't need to invest any other card to get rid of a blocker. There's only 6 of them, and as you can see, 2 of them are late game cards, like the Beerus and the Goku boss monster. So although red can minus your cards, it can rarely get rid of them just with 1 card. So it accomplishes very little in the end. It gives your blocker, let's say, minus 10k. It makes your 20k blocker a 10k blocker, and then you just block with it. Because truth be told, you would be blocking anyway with a 20k blocker, and it would die anyway. So it's not like red is this be-all end-all solution to Starter Frieza. The matchup is actually quite decent. Versus green, well, green is almost unwinnable for us because the majority of the cards cost way too much. Like, imagine what I told you about Thresholds, right? And 3 or less. Well, green's cards are usually 5+. The majority of them cost 5+ because you ramp like mad. However, when it comes to green leaders and green archetypes, we have an easier time fighting green androids, because green androids, if they go with the archetype, their cards are usually gonna be 4 cost or less. At least a good amount of them are 4 or less, while green Saiyans just kinda skip everything that costs 3 or less, sometimes 5 or less, and then just go with the big things. So green Saiyans rarely play any battle cards which cost less than or at least 4 energy. The rest of their battle cards are usually 5+, but if you're playing Frieza and you're fighting androids, you're gonna be having a bit of an easier time, because you'll have more targets to work around with, more targets for your effects, rather than if you ran into Saiyans. Versus blue, well, blue is not the best matchup, but it is doable due to a lot of potential targets. Blue doesn't have as many 5+ cards. A lot of their cards are on the low cost end, so we have a lot of potential targets for our removal effects. However, blue has a lot of ways to just bounce or bottom deck or just remove our things without KOing them. Trunks is the main offender here. Trunks can demolish a lot of our cards super easily just with activate main, and we don't get on KO effects, so we don't get full value. The color itself has a fairly decent amount of cards which can bounce our cards. Goku Black has Blade of Despair, that hits our 2 or less cards. Trunks has the activate main. Then there is the 4 cost extra card that removes 2 4 costs or less, I believe. So blue has tools, but in return we can rest the majority of blue cards. We can keep them locked, we can KO them, we can do a lot against blue, but blue can do a lot against us. So it's not the best matchup, but it's perfectly doable. Here is the deck list that we will be using, guys. It was made on Deck Planet, link is in the description below. Huge shout out to Deck Planet, it is the best deck builder. It's the best place to look up cards, to look up decks. Guys, Deck Planet, phenomenal. We've been using it for Masters for years now. Anyway, the deck list, it's experimental, it's not optimized, but as you can see, it plays a lot of Self-Awakeners. It helps you awaken very, very fast. And then we play the Ginyu package as well to get some free value here. So yeah, it's an experimental build. It will serve the purposes of this video, and it's a good blueprint to get you started. Now let's check out the mulligan. Here is the mulligan. It's super simple, it's super straightforward. We just go 1 to 3 for consistency. You keep the Ginyu. If you get Sorbet, that's also fine, it's not the end of the world. Then we keep Zarbon, because we want to keep Zarbon. We need a Self-Awakener. And your free cost can be Kui, for example. So yeah, that's the 1 to 3 mulligan. Let's jump into the turns breakdown. In this part of the video, I'm going to give you your first 3 turns breakdown. Now that you know the basics, it's time to check out how to play the deck. We'll be going over the first 3 turns with the deck. As always, we'll be using the provided deck list. We will be assuming that you went first and that you have kept the shown mulligan. Alright, let's see what this deck can do. Turn 1, the usual setup. This is what our normal turn 1 looks like. So we start the turn, we charge 1, we pay 1, we play either Ginyu or Sorbet. If we play Ginyu, we just activate main, draw 1, and then we pass the turn. There's really not much to do on turn 1. Turn 2, getting some light self-awakening. We start the turn, we charge 1, draw 1, then we pay 2 to play Zarbon. We take a life. If we get knees instead of Zarbon, doesn't matter, both of them take a life. Then we attack with Frieza, we draw 1, the attack resolves. If Ginyu is still alive, use its activate main to draw 1 card again. And then we attack with Zarbon, the attack resolves, and we just pass the turn. Turn 3, it's time to awaken. So we start, charge 1, draw 1, we pay 3 and we play Kui, I guess, the Kui, whatever, we play him. Now it's time to awaken. We awaken, we draw 1, then we attack with our leader, we draw 1 again. We attack with our blocker, attack resolves, and then we pass the turn, our leader's auto triggers, and we get to restand our blocker. Before we end the video, let's quickly jump into the summary. Frieza, like in the show, is amazing at being annoying, especially very early on, and especially once you awaken. The deck is amazing in the early turns of the game, but it runs into problem once bigger battle cards hit the field. Like we've seen in Tresholds chapter, basically once 5 cost plus start hitting the field, it's gonna be a bit problematic to deal with those cards. The deck struggles against certain colors or decks, like Trunks for example, but mainly green, which will hold it back in the set 1 meta. Because green ramps so fast, it gets its cards which avoid Thresholds so fast, and then it has removal. The 4-cost Vegeta kills your blockers, the Android Boss Monster kills your blockers, Broly, Gohan SCR, it just demolishes Frieza. Very, very fast. However, it can deal reasonably well in some other matchups. Red is okay when it comes to a matchup. Some blue decks are also okay. Yellow versus yellow is also fine. So Frieza does reasonably well in some matchups, but in some matchups it's just kinda outclassed. It's by far the best starter deck. I have a lot of you asking which decks to play at the pre-release. Frieza. Frieza is by far the best one, and it's a great jumping off point if you're looking to get into Fusion World. That's it for the video. Let me know in the comments below. Will you give starter Frieza a go? Is this the starter deck that you will be getting? Are you hyped to try out Frieza? You've probably tried out Frieza during the open beta, so how did it go? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of your comments, I try to respond to everything. I love our little community. And while you're here, hit those like and subscribe buttons, share the video, help us get to 4K subs when I'm gonna give away a booster box. This has been Damien from the Lookout, and I'll see all of you in the next video.